Hey brewers, Stu here from Newcastle Brew Shop. Welcome along to our Learn to Homebrew Day. This is a global event. It's part of the American Homebrewers Association. So we thought we'd jump on board, do a bit of a Facebook Live, and have a bit of a play and learn just the fundamentals and the basics of brewing. We're just going to go through today the Morgan starter kit, the contents of the quick kit very quickly, cleaning, sanitizing, and then how to brew our beer. It's just a basic kit and kilo brew. It's our version of the Bogues Premium. So it entails the Morgan's Blue Mountains Lager, dextrose light malt mix, and some hops, cluster and hallertau, which we'll get onto a little bit down the track. So what are we going to be doing? We're going to go through brewing from start to finish, pick up any hints, tricks and tips along the way that I've learned through my brewing journey. If you don't know, yes, I do own a couple of home brew stores, one in Newcastle and one in Port Stephens. I've only had the shops for about 3 years. I've really only been brewing myself for about 5 or 6 years, and really only started grain brewing the last 18 months, 2 years or so. So I've had to come a long way to get where I am today, but I just want you guys to enjoy your hobby, build on what you already know, and maybe we can help you get to the next level. So first thing we need to do is pour a beer. Now I'm drinking a Tinshed today. This is a red ale that I hopped up a little bit and changed to a red IPA. I used a Verdant IPA yeast, some extra hops just to give it a little bit of lift and a bit of flavour. Tinshed's a small little brewery up in Dungog area, which is the Hunter Valley region of New South Wales. And we'll be talking to their head brewer later on today to discuss the fundamentals of pro brewing. Anyway, moving right along, quickly what we're going to do is crack out a snappy Bogues Premium. So the first thing I want to do with my can kit is I'm just going to use the jug, put some hot water in the jug, and all I'm doing here, I'm just softening the contents of the jug, of the can, sorry, so that it's easier to come out when I've opened the can up and I'm pouring it. Obviously, I've taken the plastic lid off and removed the yeast from there. We're just going to use the basic yeast today. Yeah, there's plenty of other yeasts on the market, but we're really sticking to the basics and the fundamentals, and we're just going to stick with the basic brewing yeast that comes with the kit. And look, it does an okay job. It makes beer. It makes beer, and that's what we want to be able to do today. All right, I'm just going to let that soften for a few minutes. While that's softening, I'm just going to quickly go over cleaning and sanitizing. So you've probably already been sent a link about cleaning and sanitizing. Hopefully you've watched it. If you haven't, that's cool. Cleaning and sanitizing are two very separate things. So you can't sanitize something that isn't clean. So in your kit, you get a Morgan sanitizer, which you can use to sanitize, but I recommend giving it a clean first. There's a low suds that Morgan's put out, which is available as a pretty good cleaner. You can use other products like sodium percarbonate, which is an oxidizing cleaner, the Atomic here, which is an alkaline cleaner, or for any experienced brewers that are on board with us today, I'm sure they would have come across the old Pink Stain in their time. Pink Stain is chlorinated sodium triphosphate, really good stuff, awesome, really good on glass. I recommend you throw it in your dishwasher, put all your glassware in there, they come up magic. But when it comes to using it for home brew these days, I try to steer away from it simply because of the high chlorine content. We want to try and keep chlorine out of our beer, and there's other products on the market. Look, if you're using Pink Stain, that's cool. Just make sure you rinse it off in hot water and you get all that, as much of that chlorine out as you can. Okay, so today I have cleaned this fermenter. No, it's not a bucket. No, it's not a drum. It's a fermenter. And I've cleaned all the contents of the fermenter, the tap, the sediment reducer inside it. anything that's going to touch the beer today. So the spoon, I even gave the hydrometer a sanitize. My bottler, which I'm going to sanitize again, obviously, before I bottle. That's all going to get cleaned up, even the airlock and the grommet, and up under the lid. The other thing I'm going to do is I then sanitize it using the Atomic 15 foaming sanitizer. It's a no rinse solution. So if you do use that, it bubbles up like dishwashing detergent. Tip it all out. The bubbles that are left won't hurt your beer. Don't fear the foam. It's a really good product, and it's actually a bit of a yeast nutrient with what's left. So it can actually help to kick your brew along. That brand there's Atomic, Stellar Sand, Star Sand. They're a phosphoric acid based cleaner, so it's sanitizer, sorry, so you can just use those. Okay. The other thing I make up is just a little spray bottle of sanitizing solution. Just while I'm going along doing my brew, I like to spray things and just make sure everything's sanitized. Cleaning, sanitation, and temperature is what's going to make your beer come out the best. You skimp on any of those steps and you're going to run into problems. Okay? So I reckon that's probably been in there long enough. So they say with live TV that you shouldn't work with animals or children. Let's just hope that home brewing doesn't come in the same. You may have noticed I am actually doing this in my lounge room today. I had to move premise due to me having to be put into isolation. Everybody's fit and healthy. There's no problems with the shop or anything like that. But it's a good way of showing you guys that you can brew anywhere. You don't need a heap of space, and you can get away with taking over the lounge room floor as long as you buy a bunch of flowers or chocolates later on down the track. Okay, so we softened our can. We're now using said can opener. So this guy's going to be a little hot. Now, tip. Make sure this tap is closed. The number of times I've had this tap open and poured my beer into it, and I get beer everywhere, like now, you would be surprised. So, our tap is closed. If you're having trouble getting that tap to face downwards when you're putting your fermenter together, throw in a little bit of boiling water just from your kettle, slosh it around in there, pull it through the tap, let it sit in there for 5 minutes and settle, and then you'll be able to tighten your tap up while it's hot and expand it. Tip that hot water out, leave it for a few minutes, then throw some cold water in there. That'll contract the plastic down and keep it nice and tight and give you a nice tight seal. Just a little trick. Sometimes the taps don't always point down. And if you still can't quite get it to point down, don't stress too much. So we are emptying the contents of our can. So that came out pretty well. Something I probably should have done was just put a litre or two of water just in the fermenter first. It just helps to break it down a bit better. Again, this is my foaming sanitizer, so I don't have to worry about it. Give it a bit of a spray in there. Spray in here just to help to break your stuff down in the can. You are dealing with hot water, so it's pretty sanitized anyway. We're going to throw that in there. Discard our can. Grab our fermentables out and our jug. And I'm just going to throw some hot water in the bottom of the jug. Then I'll open up my fermentables, which contains dextrose and light malt. So there's fermentables and there's non-fermentables. So things like dextrose, malt, are all fermentables. Other things like lactose and fermentables, so that means that the yeast is able to break down the sugars in that product and turn it into alcohol. So you see there I sprayed my scissors, which, there we go, that's close. Bust him open. tip these into my jug. The only reason I'm doing this is it's a little bit easier for you guys to see and understand just what I'm doing here. Dissolving this in our jug of hot water. Add some more hot water to it. And then you get non-fermentables like lactose or corn syrup, which is known as maltodextrin. Lactose adds sweetness to beers. So if you're doing, you know, a milky porter or a stout or something, and you want to knock some of the bitterness off. So again, we've got our spray bottle. You'd use lactose. Corn syrup doesn't ferment either. It's a non-fermentable, and it helps with head retention. So the malts we use at Newcastle Brew Shop are Australian-made dry malt extract, which I buy through a company called Cryer Malt. I found them to be really good, a little bit gunky at times, which is what this one's doing. We're just going to have to be a little bit patient, add a bit more hot water, and just do our best to break that down as best we can. Now, they say that oxygen is bad for beer and yeast. Yes, it is, but in the initial stages, it's okay to have a little bit of oxygen going on in there because your yeast needs a bit of a head start. So I'm just trying to break this down a bit on the sides. This is a bit of a common thing that we have in the shop, people coming in. Oh, it's all clumped up. It's all clumped up. Will it be okay? Yeah, it'll be okay. It'll work its way through it. But we want to do our very best to break it down as much as possible. We will get there, I hope. I'm on a time limit here. How long have I got? I've got 3:45. I've got a couple of minutes. All right. All good. My wife is in the background. She's going to go around the corner very shortly and turn the hose on. Hopefully the connection doesn't burst and we don't flood the house. You know what I should do first? I should have another beer. That's a good beer. Cheers, Jimmy. All right. So that's pretty good there now. I'm just going to slowly add that. I'm going to get my spoon out again. Give him a spray. Give that a mix. So that's quite gluggy on the bottom. Sometimes it's a good idea, brewers, just to put a litre or so of water in the bottom of the fermenter before you add the can kit. It just helps it dissolve a bit quicker. So that's on me, that one. I'll cop that. You can all come into the shop later. I'm sure you will, Mr. McLaughlin, and give me a hard time, but that's all right, mate. Broad shoulders, so I can take it. I hope your new Fermentosaurus is going well, by the way, mate. We'll go through that again today as well with our fresh work kit. So we'll just add a little bit more of our fermentables. So an interesting fact, beer is not actually beer until it's got hops in it. So all these can kits that you see, the Morgans, the Coopers, the Black Rocks, the Mangrove Jacks, the pouches from Mangrove Jacks, all that sort of stuff, made in big breweries, and then they've concentrated it down to the thick syrup you saw me pull in, the contents of the can, which you're then essentially hydrating and adding extra sugars to. Okay, so that's all in there. That's nice and hot. So now we want to cool it down. So I'm happy that it's all dissolved. Pretty happy about that. So again, I don't know if you can see the colour of the hose here, guys. It's a light blue hose. I picked this stuff up from Bunnings. It's specially designed for fresh water, and there's no leaks. Awesome. It's specially designed for fresh water. Now, my family knows not to use this hose for anything, because this is Daddy's hose for his home brew. The only thing that goes through here is water for my beer. Now, I also do grain brewing, so I do a little bit of water chemistry. That's something we can talk about in store later on down the track. But basically what we're trying to do is add sufficient water here to 23 litres, and then we're going to pitch our yeast on top. So what I do with this, I've actually soaked this in cleaner and sanitizer in the fermenter as well today. So it's cleaned and sanitized, and it's had sanitizer poured through down the hose as well. So I know that it's all clean. I wouldn't normally use this hose fitting, but because I am sort of stuck inside, I'm going to have to today. Now we're going to have to read our mark on here. Where's our mark gone? I just lost an ear pod, so I hope you can all still hear me. Now, there is a little bit of turbulence in there, which I'm not wrapped about, but it's cool because we're going to knock all of that air out anyhow. So there's our mark on our fermenter. So we've got a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. There's our 20 litre mark, 21, 22, 23. So just at the lip there that the guys have so conveniently put on there is where we're going to fill our beer to. So we're almost there. We've got a good seal on the tap. There's nothing dripping through the tap, which is good. Just a couple of litres to go. If you do have a question, fire it off. I may not be able to get to it straight away, but that's all good. Okay, and that's our water done. I'm happy with that. I've still got my fermenter in there. Just pick him up. Give that a stir. Break all that foam and stuff on the top a little bit. Even smells like beer. It's delicious. Now you'll just have to excuse me for a minute. I've just got to throw my other earbud in. Okay, hopefully that's a little bit better. Feels really weird, but anyway. Cool, so that's all dissolved, and I'm happy with that. The one thing we don't have on here is a temperature strip. What I'm going to do first, I'm just going to throw the lid on the fermenter. Okay. Now there's a little bit of conjecture here with some people as to when to take your hydrometer reading. I was always told to take your hydrometer reading prior to adding your yeast. However, I can't see how adding yeast now and taking a hydrometer reading is really going to affect it that much. But I'll go with what I know. I'm going to get some more water and just, what do we got here? We'll just use a little bit of sanitizer, stick him in the airlock. So we're going to half fill that. The reason we half fill the airlock is so that the pressure that's created from the yeast is chewing up the sugar, and it's creating CO2, which is going to push out the air that we've put in there and the oxygen. But we don't want too much because it'll block it and the air won't escape. We don't want too little because or else all your CO2 will escape. Note on an airlock, just because your airlock's not active doesn't mean your beer's not doing something, okay? If you've got a nice, healthy trousen, you can even sometimes see a little bit of movement in your wort, which is what you've created here. It's a wort. Then you know your beer is doing something. It only takes the smallest seal breakage, I guess, for the want of a better term, for that gas to escape and the airlock won't work. But don't stress. The best way and the only way to tell if your beer is fermenting and has finished fermenting is using the hydrometer, which we're going to go on to later on a little bit after 5 o'clock today, after we've had a chat with Jimmy from Tinshed. Now, I've got a question. How hot is too hot when dissolving? So when I do a grain brew, I put all my grain in and I cook it off at whatever the recipe says, 75, 80 degrees for an hour to extract those sugars. I then remove the grain and I bring it to the boil. The reason I'm bringing it to the boil is so that I'm sanitizing the wort that I've created. So there's actually nothing wrong with, instead of pouring this wort from the can kit straight into your fermenter, pouring it into a pot on the stove, dissolving it in water, adding your fermentables, dissolve that in more water, then pour that content into your fermenter. You can't really be too hot because you're going to drop the temperature down anyway with adding the cold water from your hose. So boiling water is fine and it helps it dissolve all off easier anyway. What's going to harm the yeast is the temperature of this wort, okay? Which we want to be under that 25 degree mark before we add yeast. Ultimately, somewhere around 18 to 22 degrees is what we're looking for as an ideal fermentation temperature. Someone's just thrown a question in. What is krausen? Krausen is the bits that are left or as a result of fermentation. So what your yeast is doing, it's chewing up these sugars and it's turning those sugars into alcohol, and essentially it's crapping out CO2. And that CO2 is pushing the air out of the airlock and creating a nice healthy CO2 bed. It's just a result of that fermentation process, forms a nice crusty krausen on top. Looks horrible, smells like beer. Don't stress, a healthy krausen is a really good brew, and that's what you're looking for. Water chemistry. Okay, so where I live in Newcastle, somebody's asked me about water chemistry. Sorry, got to remember to repeat the questions back. Where we live here in Newcastle, the water's pretty good. What you can do is you can go to your local water authority and ask for a detailed description of the water, and they'll give you the hardness, the pH, all that sort of stuff. The only thing I would normally add here, which I just don't have on me today because the situation that changed where we had to do our brewing, normally I'd be doing it at the shop where I've got everything on hand, is a quarter of a Campden tablet. Campden, Campden. It's used by winemakers to stop fermentation. Homebrewers and brewers use Campden tablets to knock out the chlorine. So, give you an example, when we had those big floods, Hunter Water dosed all the water up with heaps and heaps of chlorine. Whenever there's a bit of rain, they're going to smash the water with heaps and heaps of chlorine to make sure we don't get crook. We want to get rid of that chlorine because it'll give you off flavors in your beer and can also stress your yeast out. So yeah, a quarter of a Campden tablet, no more than a quarter. If you use more than a quarter of a Campden tablet per 23 litre brew, you will kill your yeast and fermentation will stop. As far as pH levels and all that sort of stuff go, there's an app that we use at the shop called Brewfather. You can get your data from Hunter Water and you can input that data into your app, and that will then tell you what minerals you can add to change your water profile. So things like calcium sulfate, calcium carbonate. You want to check your pH. There's a few different things you can add. That's all available in store. I won't get too far into it today because we're really just focusing on the basic stuff. But as a basic home brewer, if one thing you want to do, put 20 litres of water in a container the day before, clean, sanitized container, throw a quarter of a Campden tablet in and leave that there overnight, let the Campden do its thing, and then use that water from that container to make up your brew. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Okay, another question. When mixing wort, can you use an electric bar mixer for the mix? Kevin, can't see any reason why not, as long as it's clean and sanitized, Kev. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Yeah, that'd work. I guess the one thing I will point out, mate, is if you scratch the inside surface of this fermenter, you are going to create a home for bugs to grow. And I have had customers in the past use a stainless steel spoon or stainless in their plastic fermenters, which will scratch the inside of the fermenter. And no matter how much cleaning you do, no matter how much sanitizing you do, they always get a bug and they end up having to replace the fermenters. So that actually brings me on to a good point, Kev. Thank you. When you're cleaning these guys, don't use a harsh brush. Use a soft bottle brush. Let your product, your cleaning product in your sanitizer do its work. Grab a chucks, soak it in the sanitizer and the cleaner first, and just wipe the inside of it. Over time, these will stain. You might get 50, you might get 100 brews out of it, but over time it's going to stain, and you're eventually probably going to have to replace it anyway. But use a soft chucks or a soft brush to keep it clean. Nothing too harsh. So on the electric bar mixer, nah, probably not, because you'll more than likely scratch your fermenter up. And then you have to come in and buy a good stainless steel one, which is, it's always a good option to do. Okay, when filling with cold water, do you want to minimize the foaming on top, Mel? Yeah, you do. Unfortunately, it's really got a fair bit to do with the situation I'm in here today. Ideally, I wouldn't have had that part on there. Try and fill your wort from the side. So you're going to get a little bit of turbulence, and a little bit of turbulence is okay because you do want some air and some oxygen in there. The first 24 hours of fermentation, the yeast isn't necessarily eating anything. It's simply reproducing more yeast cells to then start eating the sugars. So a little bit of oxygen in there initially is not a bad thing. So, but yes, throw my hands up, you got me. I wouldn't be using that part, but as I said, I've had to change this all very quickly on the run. Okay, so we have created our wort. We haven't created a beer. What is wort? Wort is essentially the sugars that the yeast is going to eat up. So I'm just going to take a little sample. That's about a 90 ml sample there. So that's a nice colour. There's not too much foaming there, so that's pretty good. And that's quite clear. I'm going to use that just to take, and we're going to go into this much deeper, but I give it a spin, give it a tap, knock any bubbles and stuff off it, and then we can take our reading. So our reading there is around about 1,046. Okay. In your kit, when you open up your, where is it? You get your bottles, obviously, in your kit. When you open up your kit and you get your new hydrometer, that's the used one, there's a little piece of paper in there with a table on it, and that'll give you your approximate finishing alcohol given your initial gravity reading. So we're going to record that gravity reading, and then we're going to take, but I'll get more into that a little bit later on. Okay, so I'm happy that that's at the right temperature. My basic brewer's yeast, we've got a temperature sticker on the side. It's not a bad indicator. It's not the be all and send all, but it goes okay. So this yeast, it's just basic brewer's yeast, nothing too hexy. Sanitize scissors, give it a spray. Pour my yeast in on top. Close the lid, and that's it. You, my friend, have just made your first wort, or maybe it's your second wort, and created or creating beer. Now, I need to have a drink. Too much talking. Seedy, you've done a good job of that, son. That is a good drop. Oh, hang on. We've got another question. Is it worth filling the fermenter from the bottom? Yeah, you can do that as long as your hose is long enough. Again, just, I wish I could sort of show. Is that tap off, James? So if we can pretend for a minute, Adam, that this is your fermenter, you've got your can kit in there. If your hose is long enough, hold it, and as it's filling, slowly raise it up so that the hose stays above the height of the wort that you're filling. It's just another way of filling your wort without agitating it too much. So that, good point, well made. And this is all the tips and tricks and stuff that people have done. I'm by no means the godfather of brewing. Cool. We've made our beer. We're going to put that in a nice temperature-controlled environment. So generally with most beers, I just set them at 18 to 22 degrees. The yeast is sort of pretty tolerant to that sort of temp. Different beer styles do require different temperature settings. So if you were to do a true lager, for example, you'd want to do that somewhere around the 12 to 15 degree mark, using like an S189 or an S23. They're different yeast strains. There is a good yeast strain made by Mangrove Jacks called a California lager yeast, and it gives you that lager profile, but at higher temperatures. So as the temperature warms up over the coming months here in Oz, don't be afraid to use those more temperature tolerant yeasts. The other way to do it is to temperature control a fridge. Now downstairs I have an old kegerator that I use to temperature control. Very simply, I've hooked up, and it doesn't have to be this. This is just obviously what I have and what we sell at the shop, is an Inkbird temperature controller. So the Inkbird plugs into the wall. It has a hot side and a cold side. The fridge plugs into the cold side, and your heat belt, which I use, plugs into the hot side. I then set my temperature, and I could set it on Wi-Fi via my phone if I do so wish, and brew all year round. Relatively inexpensive. You're looking about $70 for one of those, $35 for a heat belt. Set your temp all year round. Set your temp all year round, and happy days. Let it brew for 7 to 10 days. Then I like to crash cool. I'll set it to crash cool, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Now the questions come in. Are you meant to stir in the yeast? So you don't have to stir in the yeast. Look, I don't stir in the yeast. I see it as a natural thing. And again, look, there's a lot of information out there, and a lot of people have a lot of different opinions on how they make their beer, and that's cool. It's whatever works for you. I don't stir my yeast because I think it agitates it, and it gives it another opportunity to get oxidized or an infection to give you off flavors. So I sit it in there and I let it do its thing naturally. It might take 2 days to kick off. It might kick off in 2 hours. You just don't know. Feel free to stir in your yeast if you wish, by all means. But I just choose not to because I think it opens your beer up to the possibility of infection, and I just like to try and reduce that risk. Tell us pros and cons of hydrating yeast and how to hydrate a yeast. Okay, so I did this course before COVID. I know, I think I've lost a year now. Anyway, I did this course with some guys down in Sydney at Bintani from Fermentus, and they had a big debate about hydrating your yeasts. Now, if you're using liquid yeasts, which is something we don't have in store at the moment, but I'm looking at getting in. Yes, you need to hydrate your liquid yeast to give it a kick along. You need to get a flask and a good environment. They have these magnetic stir plates and things like that you use to hydrate your yeast to lift it up and pour it into your wort. Getting a little bit technical, getting a little bit away from what we're doing today, but I don't hydrate my dry yeasts. I have done in the past, and I've never really noticed a difference. What I will do is I store my yeast in the fridge. So at the shop, all our yeasts are stored in the fridge. My advice would be on brew day, get your yeast out of the fridge so that it comes up to room temp slowly, so that you're not putting a cold yeast into a room temperature wort, shocking the yeast, which will then stress it out. It may not ferment well. It may not ferment at all. It might be fine. Look, these guys at Fermentus, and this is what they do. They make yeast and they sell tons of the stuff all around the world. There's no real pros to hydrating dried yeast. Set up the probe for the Inkbird, Lukey. All right, mate. All I do, keep it pretty simple. I'll bring out another prop here, my Fermentosaurus. We just got a bit of tape with a bit of cardboard. I just put the probe down through the door and I try and get the probe in between the cardboard and the fermenter as close as I can so that it's giving me a true reading of what's happening inside the fermenter. You don't have to, I find the fridge closes and seals fine with it just going in through the door. Don't have to stress. If you have to drill a hole in the side of your fridge, obviously make sure there's no working parts in the side of the fridge, and put it in through the side. But mate, just stick it in through the door. At worst, you might have to cut a slit in the rubber in the door just to hold the cord in place. But look, I just do it like that. The new Fermentosaurus, the upgraded one, this one isn't, actually has a stainless dip tube down the bottom where you can push your probe in down through the guts, which gives you your temperature reading. So that's your probe set up for your Inkbird. Set your temps, walk away. The beauty of it, the Inkbird, I'll stick on it for a little bit. I was away a little while ago, had to crash cool a beer, and what we decided to do, I'd forgotten to ask someone to do it for me. It was on Wi-Fi, so I thought I'd test it out. Jumped on my phone, jumped on the Wi-Fi, set it to 3 degrees. By the time I got home, my beer was cold crashed. Perfect. Transferred it into a keg, and we were away. So they're a really good unit. Use them in conjunction with a heat belt. I think a heat pad just gives off a bit too much heat in that enclosed environment. You can set parameters in there as to when the cooling cycle or when the heating cycle will kick in, and you just have a play around with it. And yeah, you'll be able to brew all year round. Good bit of kit. What are we at? We're at 10 past. Have we got any more questions? Well, I think that's about it, guys. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to let this ferment for 7 to 10 days. We'll go into the hydrometer later, as I said. We will then move on later on into a fresh wort kit, how to do a fresh wort kit, pretty simple stuff. Once I've taken hydrometer readings 2 days in a row, then I know that it's finished fermenting, and I can also work out my approximate alcohol by volume, ABV, as it's known. And then we bottle or keg. Bottling. The bottles that come with the starter kit, they're just a plastic PET bottle with a plastic PET lid. So you're brewing for a week or 10 days, transfer it into your bottles. 2 carbonation drops per 750 ml, lid on nice and tight, into a constant or nice dark area with a constant temp that doesn't get too hot or too cold, somewhere around that 18 to 22 degree mark, and let your carbonation drop, work its magic, create a little bit of secondary fermentation in there, put some bubbles in the beer. Technically, you could drink it after 3 weeks. I recommend waiting at least 3 months just to let the beer age and condition. And the longer you leave it, the better it'll get. You'll probably get maybe half a dozen brews out of these guys, as long as you look after them, keep them clean and sanitized. After a while, they will start to go opaque. It's time to turf them. And long term, you want to get into glass bottles or keg systems. Glass bottles, obviously they last a little bit longer. The one here in front of us here is a flip top bottle, so it's like a Grolsch style lid seal. And all you need to do is replace the rubber seal probably every 12 months or whenever it gets a bit manky, change it out. Grab yourself a bottle tree and a bottle rinser, give it a clean, turn him upside down, stick him on the tree. Again, when we're bottling, we're going to give this a spray first with some sanitizer, make sure it's clean. Use our bottler, bottle it up. 2 carb drops in, these are 750 ml as well, and store them somewhere nice and cool where it'll just age out nicely after a few months. All right. I don't think there's any more questions that have come through. I hope I've broken a few myths. Thank you for the questions that have come through. You raised a few points there that I missed. I'm sort of doing this on the run. Please don't hesitate to contact us at the shop. There's also some more information online on our website, newcastlebrewshop.com. I'll give a plug to my mate, Andrew Rostis. He's got a brewing channel on YouTube called Stas Brewing, STASS. You can jump on there and learn a bit more about some more advanced brewing techniques with Andrew. But take a break, have a beer, put your brew down, take your time, clean, sanitize, chill out. It's only beer, and we're just getting our process right today so that we can build on something in the future. I'll be back in about 20 minutes for some more questions, hydrometer, and some more brewing tips. Cheers, guys. Thank you. Hey guys, Stu, I'm back. How did we all go? Any disasters? Anyone not screw the tap on properly? Anyone leave the tap open and filled the fermenter and then the beer started to mount via the tap? Anyone drop a hydrometer? I love hydrometers. If you haven't done any of those things, you're not a brewer yet. Trust me, I've done all that stuff 1,000 times. It's all good. It's all a part of the journey. Now, have we got CD on their names from Tinshed to have a chat? Or should we? Oh, okay, I beg your pardon. I've got a few questions here that came through. So, first one from Rachel. Will a domestic esky do to store the bottles? Yep, sure. No dramas at all. You're going to need a pretty big esky, I guess. Just make sure that it's not in the heat and it's going to stay at a nice constant temp, and that's fine. The idea of the carbonation drops is so that we're not adding sugar, and you still can if you want to, adding sugar to your brew bottles to condition your beer. Because what people used to do was they thought that they could add extra sugar to their brew bottles after they created their wort, and that would give them more alcohol. All you're doing is creating CO2 and carbonating your beer in that second process. So hence the exploding bottles. Build up too much pressure and the bottles exploded. So what you want to be able to do is store your bottles for a couple of months in that nice constant temperature environment, and then you'll be good to go. Don't add extra sugar in your bottles or extra carb drops in your bottles thinking you're going to get more alcohol. It doesn't actually work like that. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm getting a bit of feedback in my mic. Are we all going good? Thumbs up there, names? Yep, cool. All right, I've got another question here about kegging. Okay, so quickly go on to kegging. I was going to talk about that a little bit later on. I don't know if you can see there, but I do have my Series 4 kegerator here. Holds 3 kegs. When you're sick of bottling, after the first time you've bottled, you might want to look at a keg system. Basically, you're creating your wort as we did before. You're putting that wort into your keg once it's fermented. You're then force carbonating your beer with the gas bottle of the regulator that you've got that comes with the system. Again, there's a lot of personal beliefs and opinions on all this sort of stuff. I keep it really simple. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm just trying to make a beer and have it with my mates, chill out, relax. 40 pound for 2 days if the beer is at room temperature, if you're in a position to cold crash your beer. And what cold crashing means is you've brewed your beer at room temperature for the week, and instead of clearing your beer using a fining agent, you've actually put it in a fridge where you're able to chill it right down, and that settles all the sediment down to the bottom. You then dump that sediment off and then transfer the beer into the keg. If it's at room temp, 40 psi, 2 days. If it's cold, so it's been cold crashed, 40 psi for at least 20 hours. And that will carbonate your beer. There's other ways you can do it. You can sit it at 10 psi, 12 psi for a week. There is actually a table available. I think Keg King do a pretty good one on their website. I've been meaning to get a hold of it myself. And different beers can actually take up more gas or less gas, depending on the beer style. So you could also look at that as well. But look, I keep it really simple. I don't have miles of beer line and gas line in my fridge. I only have a beer line of 1.5 to 2 meters. I set my beer at 40 psi for crushing for a day or two, transfer it in, and then it sits at 3 to 5 pound for pouring pressure for pretty much its entire life in the keg, which isn't very long in my house. If I'm not going to have a beer for a couple of days, I will put 20 pound of pressure in there just for a few seconds, disconnect everything, turn the gas bottle off, bleed the system. My wife's pissing herself laughing here because she knows that I never do this because I never not have a drink at night time. And what that does, that fills the head pressure of the keg with gas so that your beer doesn't go flat. If you can imagine a half bottle of Coke, the next day it's flat because all the gas has left the liquid and is sitting in the airspace. That's the easiest place for it to live. So you've got to put some pressure in there to hold the carbonation in your beer. Of course, when you hook everything back up, remember to bleed the system and bleed that 20 pound off, set it back to your pouring pressure, or else you're just going to blow heady beer everywhere. Okay. My water is over 25 degrees. Can I add refrigerated water to cool it down before I pitch the yeast? Yep, of course you can. If you get to say 15, 16 litres and the beer's not coming down to temp, get some refrigerated water. Not a bad idea, 5 litres in a jug or something. As long as it's clean water, mate. Pour it in, bring that temperature down. If you've already added your 23 litres and you want to cool it down, you can whack it in a cold fridge and crash chill it down. It might take a few hours. The other thing you can do is, and what I used to do back in the early days was I grabbed one of those big plastic bright coloured buckets, laundry buckets from Bunnings. I used to put my fermenter in that, half fill it with water, throw some ice bricks in, and that was how I crash cooled my beer down. In these warmer months, I guess the water out of the tap is probably a little bit warmer, so you might have to do stuff like that just to chill it down. Righto, somebody else has asked me the difference between the old style fermenter and a Firmzilla. Okay, so the old style fermenter that comes with the kit is basically a bucket with a tap and a hole in the top with your airlock. Works fine, used it for years. These things have come out. The actual PET component of the unit is made here in Australia, which is really good. All the other stuff comes from other parts of the world. This is called a Fermentosaurus. It's brought out by Keg King. They're available online. This is the snub nose version. There is also a version that has a valve and a bowl at the bottom for capturing yeast. If you want to reharvest and reuse yeast, yes, you can do that if you do so wish. But the idea of one of these units is I can attach a spunding valve, and that's what this fancy bit of kit is. It's called a spunding valve. It's a pressurized airlock, if you will, and this enables me to brew my beer in this unit under pressure, transfer my beer from my Fermentosaurus directly into a keg via 2 liquid connections. So 1 liquid connection on my Fermentosaurus, 1 liquid connection on my keg. Take my spunding valve off, add a little bit of gas, and transfer the beer directly across. This, I don't know if you can see here, but this unit has a float on the tube. That float sits above the sediment at the bottom, which is why it's conical in shape, so that all the crud goes to the bottom, and that float sits above that, and you draw your clean beer off your crud at the bottom into your keg. That's the main advantage. If you want to, they actually do take pressure, so you can pressurise and gas your beer. You could actually drink from that if you wanted to and treat it as a keg. They take about 35 psi, so you might find you have to gas it for a little bit longer. I just brew and transfer out of this into a keg, and I keep using my stainless and keep turning over my beers in these. How do you put hot water in one of these? Yes, they don't like hot water. Okay, you're going to use your 5 litre jug to create your wort from your can kit and your dextrose and sugar mix, or dextrose and malt mix, sorry. Dissolve all that in your jug, half fill this with water. You're then going to slowly add the hot wort mix into the Fermentosaurus and then fill it up to 23 litres of water. If you put too much hot water in these, or the water's too hot that goes directly into these, they just shrivel up like a prune and they're cooked. They've lost all their structural integrity. in the bin. Don't knock a dog's dinner. Righto. Now I've got an old mate on the phone here. I love his nickname. They call him Seedy. Best name for a brewer I know getting around. His real name's Nathan, and he's from Tinshed. Tinshed, I came up at Dungog. I've been up there and had a couple of sessions. Well, I do a bad pulled pork, but from memory, I think it is. So we sell their fresh wort kits in store. We're going to put one on shortly using the fermentosaurus. I'll quickly go through that. We're going to do a little pickle. But Seedy,
nice.
Over.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, buddy. All right.
How you going?
I'm good, man. I'm still getting feedback, mate, so I can hear myself. There you are. Cool. All right, mate. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, not bad.
Thanks for joining us and coming along, mate. You started out as a home brewer, I take it. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah. Well, I was at uni and I needed a job and just had a mate that worked in a home brew store and got me in. So I worked a few years in a home brew store and just kind of fell in love with brewing. So then at uni, I was doing all science, doing Bachelor of Science and everything. So it just went hand in hand and just fell in love with it all and got into the whole microbiology side of things. And yeah, started brewing up a storm in the home brew shop, and it just got a bit, I was more keen on sitting out back brewing than I was actually trying to sell the stuff. So end up running into Jimmy, the owner of the Tinshed, and he was doing the fresh wort kits at the time, and he would bring him in, and I started pestering him about a job. And eventually he took me on, gave me a few days here and there, and put me on as a trainee. So I worked there for 2 years as a trainee, and then I did a course and been there for 3 years now, worked a full year as a qualified brewer. So it's really good fun. Yeah.
Cool. Sorry, mate. I apologise. There is a delay here, so I'm actually about 2 or 3 seconds behind you.
Yeah.
I'm normally about 20 minutes behind people. I'll take 2 or 3 seconds. So we had a question earlier. As a pro brewer, I guess you'll know maybe a bit more about your water chemistry stuff. And of course you're a smart uni student. What sort of water chemistry do you guys do up there at Tinshed for your beers?
Yeah, we don't filter any of our water because we're so close to the Chichester Dam and everything. Most of the water that we're getting is quite fresh and pure. It does go through certain treatments where they add certain minerals and everything. But for what we use it for and the beers that we produce, it works perfect. And sometimes we only have to add very few salts to it just to adjust the pH depending on the grains that we're using. So your roasted, your black grains are a bit more acidic. So we would add like your calcium carbonate, your chalk. Add that to it just to kind of balance out that acidity for the darker beers. But yeah, we don't really get our water tested. We haven't gone through the intense thing. It's more just comes down to the kind of styles and flavors that we're going for. And because we do a lot of the rustic kind of European style beers, the more full-bodied styles, it's works perfect for us. It's just very slight modifications. We have tried doing like your Neepers and things like that, your more New World beers, and we add things like your gypsum and your calcium chloride and that to it. But you'd need to take it a step further to get like something that you could actually run through a competition. We're more keen on sticking with the styles that we're kind of known for. So yeah.
Cool. So you worked in a home brew shop. that's where you got your start.
Yeah.
You've dealt with 1,000 customers. What's a good bit of advice you give for a new beginner homebrewer, which is sort of who we're really focusing on today?
Clean everything. Make sure everything is spotless. If there's, say, if your work area has a bit of ventilation, there's airflow. Make sure that you kind of can limit that, because there's certain, like most people are in their sheds and stuff, and you might have a bit of dirt or mold somewhere, and there could be spores or some impurities in the air that might get into your brew. So if you can limit that, that just really helps to get more consistency within your brew. And then besides that, it's temperature control every time. Just cleaning and temperature control. Throughout every process.
Cleaning and temperature control. Pretty much what I tell everyone all the time. Yeah. Cool.
Yes.
So when you started out, you just did can kits, I assume, to get started. And then did you play around with fresh work kits after that? And then onto all grain? Did you sort of go down that process, or did you jump straight into all grain?
No, that exact process. I started with the extracts, and I got to the point that I started modifying things. And like you read the recipe, I did it exactly to the T sort of thing. And then I started adding more and more hops, seeing how far I could take it. Then I started messing around a bit with grains, adding steeped grains and that, like the liquid from the steeped grains, into the fermenter with the concentrate kits, hopping the hell out of everything as you do. Then I went into the fresh work kits and started messing around with those and adding things and playing around and talking to people. Every customer that would walk in would have a different story. So I'd talk to people. Communities are amazing things. And then I started using doing like your grain brews and that. I didn't do too many of those working in the home brew store, just because it's the time consumption of everything at the time. Although the owner then was like, well, we can put on a show and throw you kind of out in the middle of the floor and have you brew and everything while customers come in and question you about it. And I'm like, yeah, as long as I'm brewing, I'm happy. So yeah, started messing around with that, creating my own recipes, and customers would give their feedback and go backward and forward. And yeah, it was great time. And even now, working in the brewery, we're closed Mondays to Wednesdays. And even when I'm brewing, people come in and start questioning me about anything and everything. And it's great community.
Yeah, cool. So for our new guys out there, we've just run through the basics of an extract kit. What would you say the main difference is between a fresh work kit and all grain for, say, flavour and mouthfeel of the beer or the final product?
Yeah, well, they're brewed the exact same. So the fresh work kit and the actual all grain, for the process that we go through, we brew it the exact same process, but rather than running it through, say, the chiller to bring it down to temperature so we can start fermenting, we pump it directly into the cubes at still 100 degrees at the boiling temp after we've whirlpooled. The only difference would be the kind of bittering hops and the flavor hop additions, just because it is at such high temperatures for so long. You can draw out excess bitterness and things like that from your hops that you're adding to it. So we kind of reduce those. We do a lot of whirlpooling hops with them. So when we start whirlpooling, we add in our aroma hops and that. We can't really get like your cooler whirlpool hops. So things like your IPAs and stuff, for the fresh work kits, we'll rely more on people dry hopping. Whereas in our fermenters and that we ferment for our kegs and our canned products, We'll whirlpool the beer until it's about 85 degrees and then add the hops then, because you won't draw out a lot of the bittering acids, but you will still draw out a lot of the flavor and some of the aromas still at that temperature. So that's probably the main difference between the two. Besides that, it is up to it's very much the same. The fresh wort kits you can modify as much as you want because it's before the fermentation stage. So if you want to add more grains, like your steeped grains, your more hops in that beforehand, before you start the fermentation, then go for it. Like, the world's your oyster. You can change flavors as much as you want. Like, it's amazing the stuff that's out there.
For your boots. So when you're saying you added grains to your kit and kilo kits, so what we just did before, how much grain, how much water were you using? How long was it in for? Was it in a grain bag, or did you just filter it off?
Well, what I used to use is I'd probably, depending on what grains I was using, say if I wanted to use an example, say I wanted to make a black lager out of, say, just a lager kit, I'd probably use up to 250 grams of like your roasted grains, steep it in boiling water, maybe say 200 grams to 2 liters, say, and then I'd tip it into the fermenter through just a kitchen strainer. That's as I'm starting to fill it. So I'd already have like the extract and everything in there dissolved, and then I'd start just pouring the liquid in there before adding the cold water. You want to do it before so then you can manage the temperatures and stuff as you're filling the fermenter. So that sort of thing. There are other things you can add, things like your Munichs and stuff. You'd probably add a touch less, depending on the intensity of the flavor that you're going for and the colors and all that sort of thing. Like, you can go nuts.
Go nuts. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Do you play with liquid yeast much? Or I haven't actually played with a lot of liquid yeast. And some people have said that every failure they've had is when they use liquid yeast, and then other people have said the best beers they've ever made have always been with liquid yeast. So again, I guess that's the whole brewing world, isn't it? It's all about what works for you.
Yeah, my experience with liquid yeast is if you're going for a very particular style, like an Abbey style and stuff, it's like, it is good because you can't really get a good dried yeast to do that. Whereas us at the Tin Shed, we just use dried yeast for everything. Talking to one of the guys of Lallemand yeast, he's saying that the actual package technology that they have with all the dried yeast and stuff these days is they lyse the kind of insides of the packs and that with oxygen. So when you open up the pack, it's kind of released through the yeast as you're tipping it out. So all the little pores in your dried yeast going into your fermenter have enough oxygen and stuff to already start kicking off the brew. So he says there's no real need to create the starters or anything like that with a lot of the dried yeast on the market today. Unless you're going for your very particular styles and stuff. If you're brewing to a style, the liquid yeast can work better, but you do have a live product that you're tampering with in open air before you're pouring it in and it's touching everything else. And whereas a dried yeast, you're literally just pouring a granulated or dormant yeast into a liquid, and then it starts hydrating and start getting active. Another thing is, like, at our size at the moment, dried yeast is all we can do. We're looking at opening up a production brewery just down the road because we can't produce enough. So we're looking into yeast propagation, which would be taking yeast from previous batch, growing it and adding it to multiple batches in the future, like our next batches and stuff. So that's something I've got to do a lot more reading on and research, but there's plenty of information out there. Just got to kind of find it and get into it. Go back over my TAFE studies.
Yeah, cool. So it's good to see Jimmy's keeping on your toes, mate.
Yeah.
How big's the system up there at Tinshed?
We have a 500 litre system at the moment, but it's only a 2-vessel system. So a lot of the units are dual purposed. So we have one is triple purposed. It's split in half. There's a hot liquor tank under the mash tun and lauter tun. And then the other one is a kettle and whirlpool. So in a normal brewery, you would have like 5 different tanks for all the various operations, whereas ours is only the 2. So, but in because we're building the larger brewery, we're looking at, I think it's twice the size. It's going to be 1,000 liters. It's going to be, I think it was going to be the 4-vessel system. But because of how it's laid out, we can do 2 runs in one working day. So we can produce 4 times the amount in a day if we need to, if the need kind of comes up and we get stuck.
Yeah, right. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So what's Jimmy going to do with his 500 litre system? I reckon I've got a few people on mine now.
Well, it's going to stay in. It's going to stay in the brew, like the brew that we have at the moment, which is kind of like a tap house and all that, because it looks nice. All the tanks and stuff lined up, keep it nice and shiny. We could do like test batches, and we could do some kind of more. We've talked about doing like brew days, get the public interested in certain brew, like do voting systems, things like that. The public come up with an idea. We do a brew day. We brew the beer, have it in a 500 litre tank, ferment it out, have it on tap, give people beer and stuff because a brew day would probably be like a paid thing because of insurances and all that, but it would also be like a lunch and it'd be a full day process, beers, all that. And then we'll do like just like a carton each to everyone that attended after it's finished fermenting, that sort of thing. Or the bosses also put ideas about doing other side projects and stuff into it, just to sit there, like your imperial stouts that will just sit there for months on end, or your barrel aged stuff. So we would add your kind of toasted wood chips to it and age it for 2 years and things like that. Jimmy's the sort of person that will have 1,000 ideas, voice 100 of them, but only go through with maybe 1. And everything
I know Jimmy
aside, so.
already without even really knowing Jimmy.
Yeah.
Exactly the same type of thing. All these ideas buzz around in my head, but what to do next? So, where are you guys exactly? I mean, I know where you are, but for our listeners.
We're out in Dungog, so it's about 50 minutes out of Maitland. I think it's a little over an hour if you cut through. What is it? I've never driven from here to say Newcastle.
It's in the main drag, isn't it? Sort of.
Yeah, we're on the main drag of Dungog. But I think it's just over an hour into Newcastle from here.
Cool.
Yeah. So the Jimmy and Haley, they do all the deliveries and stuff to like you guys and that. Which we're trying to get on top of the cubes. We're kind of running a bit low. Things have just gone.
Newcastle likes drinking them, mate. They're
yeah.
Good drop. Which actually leads me on to the next thing. What's the range of beers you do? Just quickly give us a quick run through of all the beers you do up there.
In the fresh words or just in general?
Fresh word kits, mate. Yeah,
fresh words. Fresh words. We have. We'll start with. There's the lager. Then we go to the XPA, the Galactic. Well, it's a Cascade XPA. It's a single hopped XPA. The Galactic Pale Ale. We have the Little Pickle, which is the mid-strength Pale Ale. The Big Pickle, which is the IPA. The Rustic Ale, which is like the kind of Jimmy's first brew he ever actually created himself, like just messing around with the grains and brews and not following a recipe or any ideas. He just went with the flavors. Then there's the Red Ale, which was designed to be modified. That one is just like a very kind of on the lighter end. It's a little fruity, quite sweet, but it's made to be like you can turn it into an Irish, American, a red IPA. Just add some more fermentables, hop the hell out of it, like all the good stuff.
Yes, I'm actually drinking at the moment. I turned into a bit of a red IPA with some
beautiful
125 grams of hops and a Vernon IPA yeast. And it's going down a treat, doing the job. The one I'm going to put on now is a Little Pickle. What can you tell me? What's in a Little Pickle? Sergi?
All right, well, give me 2 seconds and I can tell you exactly, because I've got every recipe I develop on my phone. After I scroll through.
Don't say too much. Bruce Stipe should be listening and he'll record this and about himself.
So, with the Little Pickle, we use Chinook as our bittering hop, just a little bit, just kind of balance out the little bit of grains and stuff, just so it doesn't come out too sweet and everything as a mid-strength. You don't want it that kind of beer cordial and stuff that some mid-strengths can taste like. But then we whirlpool Cascade and Calypso into it. So Cascade, bit citrusy sort of flavors, and then your Calypso, your more kind of tropical, fruity sort of flavors. So it's very kind of your more American style kind of mid-strength. So it's very easy to drink, quite fresh, perfect for the weather that's about to hit us as summer approaches. So,
there you go. That's why I'm putting it down today, so it's all ready for Christmas, because I like to age my beers from a little while in the keg. All right, man. Thank you very, very much. I don't think I'll take up any more of your time. I'm going to have a go at putting this Little Pickle down. I don't know how I'm going to do it without getting stuff everywhere, but we'll give it a crack.
I was going to say the best way to pour those is vigorously, so then it kind of slurps a lot and draws in extra oxygen just from the air as it's hitting into the fermenter. But using something like a fermentosaurus might prove some kind of issue. But if you're using dried yeast and everything, it'll turn out perfect anyway.
Well, so we're on live video here, mate. So if beer goes everywhere,
make a mess. It's all good. People need to see when things go wrong and how to fix them. It's okay to stuff up.
Yeah, that's it. That's what it's all about.
It's all a learning process.
That's the journey. All right, man. Thanks, Stevie. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Have a beer. If you can't get there, all the beers are available at Newcastle Brew Shop. Throw down a fresh water. Get it ready for summer now. No worries, man. Anytime. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, you too, man.
Cheers.
Have a good one, guys. See yous.
All right. Little Pickle. I could be in a big pickle if this goes pear-shaped. I'm going to admit, I'm nervous. So, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I've already cracked the seal on the lid before. I might have to get my trusty friend over here to give me a hand. But what I'm going to do is pour the first part of this, and probably doesn't really matter, but I'm just going to pour the first bit of this into a jug. So as you can see, when they fill these bloody things, they really do fill them to the very top. So there's no chance of any bugs or oxidization in there. So bang, straight away. I don't know how to explain the look on my wife's face. It's so far, so good. Smells like beer. Awesome. Cool. Okay. So, I'm just going to very quickly set that aside. Get my Antisaurus ready. My spray bottle of sanitizer. Give a quick spray up underneath. Spray around the lip. Spray in the fermenter quickly. Trying to move it a little bit of pace here so that we don't oxidize it. We'll get a bug. Again, sanitizer in there. Anything that's going to touch the beer, give it a belt with sanitizer. Now going to attempt putting beer in here without getting it everywhere. 1, 2, 3. So as Sudi said, vigorously, don't be afraid. These fresh white kits are the closest you'll get to a grain brew without actually doing a grain brew. Now the grain brewing process takes about 4 or 5 hours from way to go. There is some footage coming up there a little bit later on if you want to watch that. Using a grain filer, one of many systems available. But these things, put it this way, if I don't have time to do a grain brew, I'll bang out one of these really quick. So I'm just going to put the remainder of that to go in there. I'm just going to keep a little bit for a sample later on for the hydrometer demo. Where is my USO 5? Here it is here. Scissors. Up on there. So I can see the temperature of that is between 22 and 24, so that's okay to add my yeast. There's a bit of foam there on top, no stress. Sanitizer on the scissors. That's interesting what he said about the Lullerman guys. I'm trying to get in touch with them about the oxygen in the yeast. Now again, I don't stir it. I just think it increases the risk of infection. Sanitizer, top, give it a swirl. Just to move it around, it doesn't all end up in the dip tube. Shouldn't have touched it, so this again. Drop that in there. Screw them down. Nice tight seal. The relief valve is set properly. Another little tip, make sure your relief valve's not sitting in the open position because you'll heat your beer and all your gas will leave and you won't have your CO2 bed to keep your beer nice and safe. So make sure your thing goes down there. And that is the spunding valve. So this spunding valve is actually handmade in the USA. I haven't had it too long. It did make a little bit of a mess on the floor. There we go. So this spunding valve is handmade in the USA. There's a few different ones out there. I've found this spunding valve to be really, really good. It's quite tough. Someone's already asked me, what is a spunding valve? A spunding valve is a fancy airlock. It's a pressure-controlled airlock. So what it allows to do with your, don't have it here, your S-bend airlock, the water pressure of it being half full of liquid is what creates a restriction to indicate that the gas is moving through the airlock, yeah? So what you've got in this unit is a gauge, and you can adjust the pressure, and you've got this little water container unit which shows you that your beer is fermenting. So it acts like it bubbles like a fermenter does. So this spunding valve is connected to a gas disconnect on the gas post of the fermentosaurus, which is the same fittings on the gas post of a normal Cornelius homebrewing keg. So as the fermentation process is going along doing its thing, the pressure in here is increasing. I've got this set somewhere around the 10 psi mark. The pressure goes in here, it reads it. It's set here in this part of the unit. If there's any excess pressure, it goes through this part of the unit and simply bubbles out and equalises. So I'm pressure fermenting at around 10 psi. Why am I pressure fermenting? Pressure fermenting can make the fermentation process faster. It can also make the process more stable. I also like the idea of keeping as much CO2 in there as I can and being able to control that just to keep the health of the yeast and the beer up to where it is. And look, there's a lot more expensive units than this available out on the market. For a couple of $100, you can get yourself a fermentosaurus. Really handy if you're kegging. If you're kegging, like I said, you can do your closed transfer directly into your keg. If you wanted to, you could get a Pluto gun and you could hook him straight up to the liquid side. So on your disconnect, for those that don't know, black for beer goes on the black disconnect, pushes down on there. It's going to make a liar out of me on national TV. There we go. So the disconnect pushes on there. I could then essentially drink this beer directly from this once it's all finished carbonating. Going to remove that. I really like them. You can actually sit there and watch what's going on. You can see your temperature through the temperature sticker. It's got a graduation sticker on the side so that you've got, you know, how much work you've got in there and what it's doing. And obviously there's the other unit. It sits a little bit higher. You've got your dump valve so you can dump the yeast and trub off down the bottom to reuse the yeast or to get rid of it. Because I do like to get my beer off the yeast. One thing I haven't spoken about yet is racking and clearing. I'll very quickly go over it. So what we did earlier, we did our kit in the standard 30-litre fermenter. After it's fermented, and I've taken 2 hydrometer readings, and they're the same readings 2 days in a row, then I know that it's finished fermenting and it's done its job. I like to get a bit of transfer hose, 12, 13 mil transfer hose, metre or so long, and I'll transfer my beer from the main fermenter into a secondary fermenter, filling from the bottom up, a bit like I think it was Adam that asked a question when you initially fill your beer, filling it from the bottom up so that you're not oxygenating the beer. Add some beer finings, which is a gelatin-based product, and that clears your beer right up and gets all that trub and muck down to the bottom so that you're not putting that in your keg or in your bottles. Some people don't mind a cloudy beer. For me, I like to get some of it off because I like to get the beer off that old yeast. The idea of this one is that it has the dip tube, so it ferments for a week. I then set my fridge or my fermenting vessel to cold. I crash cool it, all that trub and crap and stuff goes down to the bottom, and the floating dip tube allows me to draw clean beer from above the trub directly into my keg. Really good bit of kit, relatively inexpensive. They fit nicely in a fridge. Like I said, I've got mine in an old Series 4. If you can get yourself a second-hand fridge or freezer, there's a handle on the side if you're doing the old chest freezer jobby, but look after your back. Yeah, I think they're a really good thing. As long as they're maintained and you don't put too hot of water in it, or else it'll turn it into a prune. That's the fresh wort kit. So that's been done in a brewery. You spoke to Seedy, good water quality, controlled environment, good ingredients. Blokes, this is what they do for a living. That's going to be a cracker of a beer. Again, I'll dry hop that day 4. I guess the other advantage is when I crack the lid on that and add my dry hops in and put the lid back on, if I'm concerned, I can give that a squirt of CO2 and then purge it off with the relief valve to let any air out that I've let in through the dry hopping process. I can let that air out and manually replace the CO2 bed. Good bit of kit. Question from Adam, is an Atomic 15 in the spray bottle sanitizer? Yeah, so Atomic 15's the sanitizer. Yep. It's just made up 1.5 ml to a litre. Don't go over that. It's really strong stuff. If you do go over that, you can harm the beer and taint the yeast. It doesn't have to be Atomic 15, mate. Any sanitizer will do. I would just be steering away from the pink because the pink has that chlorine in it. The Morgans do one, Mango Jacks do one. Yeah, it's just a handy bit of kit. Anything that does. Will these beers be on tap in the shop? Depends how long I'm stuck in lockdown for. Probably will be. As soon as we're able to get over these COVID restrictions, guys, I do intend on having beers back in store. As you can appreciate, it sucks and it's a pain in the ass for everyone, but it's the way we got to be. I just can't have people in the shop standing around having a beer as much as I'd like to. And I enjoy pouring a beer and having a mag with your bag of brews. I've essentially got to get you in the store, help you out, get your stuff, and get you out the door, just to minimise the contact. This is the first time I've been in a lockdown situation, and it's not fun. So, all good. Is there any other questions? Oh, hydrometer reading. I nearly forgot. Okay, so you'll notice I did keep a little sample of Tinshed's beer. Okay, let's clear the area here a little bit. Get rid of our gun. Get rid of some mess. Sorry, Mr. Dennis. Morgans. Great products. Great products. Righto. Now, in the break, I did give this a clean and sanitise, as I always do with all my stuff. I'm not going to get a drink of this beer anyway. So, at about 90 ml, try and get it in the jar if you can, it's always helpful. So one thing you don't want to do is to draw your sample straight from the bottom of your fermenter, and if it's got any particles in it. Because how hydrometer works, it gives you specific gravity of the liquid in your fermenter compared to water. So water has a specific gravity of 1,000. These hydrometers are calibrated to 20 degrees water that has been distilled, so it has no minerals in it. So if you want to be really precise, get your brewing water that you're using and repeat this process with your brewing water, and you'll get a little bit of a difference, and you need to apply that difference to your readings. It's not going to make a massive difference, but if you're getting really concerned or you really want to get into the deep dive of it, take a hydrometer reading of your water and apply that to these readings here today. So, what we don't want bubbles and we don't want foam and stuff sitting on the hydrometer. So we poured it in, we're going to give it a spin to knock any of the bubbles off. We also like to give it a bit of a tap. Now that's just floating there, which is what we want. It's actually almost just hitting the bottom, so I'm just going to add a little bit more. Isn't this live TV stuff? Oh, here we go. All these little things that happen to brewers. Bit of spin, one tap. In your starter kit, pull out your hydrometer and have a look at it so that you know what you're looking at when you're taking your reading. There's also a little piece of paper in there in with the hydrometer that will give you your approximate ABV from your original reading. So what we're taking is OG, which is the original reading. So we've got 1,000, 1.1 down here, we've got 1,000 up here. So this is reading, there's a little beer start and finish symbol. We've got about 1,000 and, oh, good on you. It's better out of me now, I can't see it. You hate that? We've got about 1,030. So I'm going to record that down as 1,030. I'm then going to come back in a week's time and I'm going to take another recording. And then on day 7, maybe day 6, if I'm impatient, record that reading on day 6, day 7, come back and do another one 24 hours later. When they're both the same, then we know that the beer has finished fermenting and the yeast activity is no more. It's not going to do any more. It's just going to sit there on old yeast and essentially it's going to turn into Vegemite. We don't want Vegemite. So we know it's finished. So we've recorded our original gravity for our starting gravity. We're then going to record our finishing gravity, which is the one on day 7 after we've got 2 in a row. And then we divide that number by 7.46. I'll see if Naomi can do some magic on there and put something up on the screen, or we can send it as a message or something. So it's original gravity minus your final gravity divided by 7.46. Now, if you're bottling and you're bottle conditioning, so you're going to bottle it and put a couple of carb drops in there, store it away, come back and drink it 3 months later, I want you to add 0.5 to whatever that number is. And that will give you your approximate alcohol by volume, also known as ABV. That is how you use a hydrometer. It does not tell you alcohol, it tells you specific gravity. So write it down, original gravity minus final gravity divided by 7.46 will give you your ABV. If you're bottling, add 0.5 to that. Cool. Now someone's thrown in a question. When adding hops, hop stock or loose pellets? Look, I just throw mine in loose. Again, it's whatever works for you. Because I use the fermentosaurus, I know that the hops are all going to get wet. They're all going to get infused in the beer, and the yeast is going to be stirring around and doing its thing. And all the trub's going to go to the bottom, and the hops are going to go to the bottom. And I'm only going to draw a clean beer from the bottom of from the top of the trub. So I don't worry about hop stocks. If you're concerned about sediment and stuff in your beer and getting sediment in your keg system at all, feel free to use a hop stock. Just make sure that the hop stock is large enough, 1, to contain your hops, obviously, but 2, allow the hops to expand. They probably quadruple in size once they're wet. Now, what you'll find is if the bag or the hop bomb that you're using isn't big enough, it'll expand out, pop open anyway, you'll get hops and crap everywhere, or it won't open up and the hops in the middle will actually be dry. They actually won't have any impact on your beer at all. So I throw mine in loose, but bearing in mind I am using a fermentosaurus which allows me to draw from above my tub. Unless you're going to racking and clearing and you're prepared to rack and clear and let it sit for another week and clear out, just throw your hops in loose. No other questions anymore for any more? How do we all go with our brewing? Have we got any disasters? Any questions? No? Oh, that's no fun. Even my first brew. My first brewing disaster. I was 18. I got given a brew kit. Put down a black beer. Moved out of home, didn't I? Chased the love of my life. Moved out of home. Forgot all about the beer. Just forgot about it. About 18 months later, my mum rang me hysterical. Called me all manner of things. I didn't know these words were in my mother's vocabulary. I said, what's going on? She walked past the fermenter that had been there for 18 months with a 2 years old, because I thought I'd do a 2 years old so that me and my grandfather could have it. And she's knocked the bloody fermenter. The tap's fallen off. 23 litres of black, infested filth went through the whole garage. It wasn't just a garage, was it? She thrown a bit of carpet down here and there, done a few little renos so that it was a spare house. Don't forget about your beers. Trust me, you know how to do it. We all make mistakes. It's all part of the journey. I still make mistakes. You'll drop a hydrometer, you'll smash it. I dropped one the other day. It happens. Have fun with it. Chill out. Enjoy it. Brew with your mates, and let's build from there. We can add grain to your beers. We can play with some grain brewing stuff. We do have some more grain videos coming up that we did last week. We played with the new grain for the G40, but we're doing some videos on the G30, which is a great little system, all-in-one brewing system. Grain brewing is a 4-hour process. What the brewer's done here, what Stevie and the guys have done up at Tinshed, they've extracted the sugar from the grain by cooking it, essentially, and then we're adding yeast to those sugars to create beer. You're, with grain brewing, getting the raw ingredients, adding them in to a big kettle with a pump, pumping it around for an hour to extract all those fermentable sugars, lifting it in a basket out so that the grain comes out of that liquid. You're rinsing it off with hot water to get it to the volume. You're then bringing it to the boil, running it through a cooler, and straight into your fermenter. It is a 4 or 5 hour process. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it. You can do whatever beer you want in the world. You're not hamstrung by the can kits. Not that the can kits are a bad thing. Look, a lot of the can kits are really, really good. There's a lot of good products out there with can kits. That is a 4 hour process, 5 hour process. Time to throw a few beers in there can turn into a 6, 7 hour process. Just talk to a couple of my mates. The smoker's always going on at the same time, so we're knocking out a brisket. The cricket's on this time of year, normally it'd be the footy. But look, it's a lot of fun. If you want to hang around and watch that process, we have knocked it down to about a 20-minute video for you viewing this afternoon to have a watch. And while that video is playing, Andrew, who works in store, he's got the Stas Brewing channel, bit of a guru, beer nerd, one of those smart, highly intelligent, bit like Sleedy, goes to uni and stuff. He'll be online and he'll be answering all your questions. So I think that's a wrap for me, Nose. Is that it? And we're going to come back and talk about November and a few other bits and pieces. But Cheers, guys. Watch the video on grain, see how you go. Any dramas, call on Monday when I'm not there, and Katina and Andrew will be more than happy to help you. Cheers. So that.
Can you just
Is the bottom plate. How it comes from Grainfather is obviously that's all undone. We put this silicon rubber around the side. In order to get that silicon rubber to take, I'm just going to take you through this quickly. And not everybody's going to love this method, but it works for me. And that's all about brewing, whatever works for you. So, done that inside of the grain basket. Just so it makes it, and of course, because we're on camera, this won't go smoothly at all today. But when I did it over the weekend, it went straight in there. It was magnificent. So, in goes our in the grain bed, ensuring that our lugs are at the bottom, so that when we're pulling our grain bed up, our grain basket can sit on those lugs. Okay. Slide him in like that. So it sits on top of that filter down in there. And then our bottom plate goes in. And this is where we get a little bit gentle. And so far, so good. Now, I can almost guarantee you, if you hadn't have done that sanitizer thing, you'll be swearing, cursing, spending hours trying to get that bottom plate on. From there, assemble our malt pipe. Little lugs down the bottom, facing down, slides on. Top cover goes on there. Then what we're going to do, our grain sits on the bottom plate, and then we would put the top plate on top, turn the unit on, and that's going to circulate water through this arm here, which is a simple screw on. We valve on it so that you can control the flow to the pump. Now obviously you've got the pump and the heat side you can control manually on this unit. You can also Bluetooth it to your phone and make it work automatically. Then our silicone hose goes on. We've got our grain in there. We've got our plate on top. It's all making beautiful beer. Things are going well. Okay, now it's time to sparge. So we get our handle, lift him up, turn it, sits on there on the sparge, and then we're just going to create from our sparge water heater, our sparge water to rinse the sparging through. Okay. That's why it's called an all-in-one unit, because you can mash and sparge all in the one. That's it. Right, guys. We use at Newcastle Brew Shop. We like to use the Brewfather app. We find it works across a lot of different brewing systems. So the Grainfather, the Brewzilla, the Guten, even your Brown Meister and your higher end brew tools stuff, if you like. So what I've got here, I'm just going to do a very quickly today in the G30. We're going to do the Panhead Quick Charger XPA. Righto, so we open up our Brewfather app. We've loaded our recipe. That's our recipe. We've loaded that into a batch. So we go to a beer we're going to do, which is the 4.7% Panhead Quick Charge. Click on that. Click on this. Grainfather G30. All our timings, all our hops, all our grains. We know that's what it is. Click on the little beer symbol, and it goes to the brewing stage. So up the top there, you've got brewing, planning, fermenting, and completed. So in the planning, it's got everything we need. We can tick these off if we want as we go through. I'm happy that it's all there. So the next thing I'm going to go to is the brewing stage. So I click on the brewing, change status to brewing, confirm, and it's now got a mash tracker there. Now if I hit play on that mash tracker, heat 16.54 litres of mash water to 68.9 degrees, cover for 2 minutes. Hit OK, that's now what we're doing. So pause that, 70 degrees on the Grainfather. Our heater's on at 100%. The temperature's currently 53 degrees. So we've got a few degrees to go before our mash water's brought up to the correct temp. So the next stage we're going to do, guys, it's a basic mashing stage. Ed, my trusty side floor here is going to give me a hand. I always have a thing of sanitizer here in a spray bottle. Just give it a quick spray. That's just a no rinse sanitizer, won't hurt it. Get a little bit of water moving in there. And Ev's just going to slowly add that grain in for us. Eventually, getting there. And all you want to do is you just want to make sure that it doesn't clump up. So if you were doing this by yourself, you'd pour in a third or a quarter, stop, give it a stir, make sure it's all wet, nice and wet, not clumped up. Then you'll go again, do another bit more. Give it a stir again, so it's not all clumped up. And you'll smell it straight away. It starts to smell of awesomeness. sometimes you find if there's not quite enough water in there, and I would suggest there may not be quite enough water in this, I'm going to add a little bit. So I always have my sparge water heater over there going. So it's a nice hot water. We'll just throw in 500 ml. Give that a stir, yeah, that's heaps better. So it's all nice and wet now. It's a nice wet grain bed. We're mashed in. That's our mash stage done. Going to get our top plate. Grab a bit of sanitizer. Just makes it easier to slide it in. Use that silicone, but that's cool. Push our top plate down on the top. It's nice and flat. And voila, we're mashed in. So you'll see on the timer there, guys, 5 seconds to go. That'll be our 2-minute cover period. There we go. Then the alarm goes off and it tells me what I have to do next, which is my mash addition, to which we're not going to worry about today because we've got really good water. Okay. Put a lid on so we can chill over the top. Connect our arm. At this point, I close the valve just to help prime the pump. Go over here, press play. So it gives us our next step on what we have to do. Not sure if that worked, yeah. There we go, we're away then. I haven't pressed continue. Press pump on here. Can you hear the pump going? Let it prime for a little while. Slowly open that up. And there you'll see there's the water getting pushed through the grain bed and creating the mash. So if we go back over here, our target's 69 degrees, we're on 71. That'll slowly cool down as it goes through, because you can see that the pump's not on. It's at 0%. So I'll let that do its thing for the next 44 minutes and 20 seconds, and then we'll go into the next stage. Cheers. All right, guys, we've just, our alarm's gone off on Brew, so we've acknowledged that, and we're now going to go into the sparge. So we need to turn our pump off, put our pump settle, and then I like to shut this valve off. Undo this fella here a bit gently. You will get a little bit of bubbling. So there's your arm, comes out. Always have a bucket. Put stuff in. Lid off. Caution, hot. Into our bucket. And this is the beauty that makes this an all-in-one system. Is we lift our grain basket out. Sit him up on the lugs. You hear that water dripping through? That is essentially the water in the grain bed dripping through into the main boiler part of the grain flour. And then what we've got to do is rinse this off with fresh water from our sparge water heater. So this recipe says 15 litres. So we'll keep a count how many jugs we do. Just do 3 litres at a time. This water's at about 75 degrees, 70, 75 degrees. That's about what you want for sparge water. So I'm just going to pour a little bit at a time as it runs through. Let that run through, and then we want to try and keep it about an inch or so above the top of the grain plate so that you can keep your sparge water up so it doesn't run too dry. So we'll let that do its thing for a little while, but basically you're just going to repeat this process until your sparge is complete. Sweet, that's sparging. Our sparge is complete. We're going to lift our grain bed out, and we just grab that bucket there, please. There's nothing more dripping through there. That's all good. Grain bed comes out into the bucket. You feed the chooks with that loader. Whack this up to a boil at 100 degrees. We always leave the lid off at this point because what will happen, it'll foam up, and if you put the lid on, it'll overflow and it'll end up with beer and wort everywhere. So, congratulations, you just made it work. I'll just let you take it. Yeah, right. There's 100 on it. So there we are. That's the alarm on the Grainfather, guys, telling us we're at 100 degrees. So let that boil. Well, what you want to do, a little tip, is just break the surface tension of this. Just so you don't get a boil over because it's foamed up there quite a bit. So the boil part of the process has two functions. First function is it sanitizes the wort, so it kills any bacteria or anything that might have come into the wort. It knocks all that off. And the second thing it does, the boil is when you add your hop additions. So different recipes will give you different timings to add different hops, and that extracts different bitterness and flavours from the hops to give you your particular flavour of beer. And again, with the Brewfather app, you press play on the app and the timer starts, and then it'll give us timings of when to add our hops into this one. But just a tip, keep stirring, especially the first 10 or 15 minutes of the boil, just to break that surface tension so that you do not get a boil over. Right, so we're into our boil. So with all hop addition timings with Grainbrewing, it'll say 15 minutes, and it's 15 minutes left to go on the boil. So our alarm's just gone off on Brewfather, which we've acknowledged, and we're now just going to add our first hop addition. Let that go in there. Our timer's still going, so then it'll give us timings for the next hop addition shortly. So this recipe calls for a hop stand. So we've done our boil, we've added our hop additions throughout the boil to get the flavours from the hops. And now we're going to go on to a 30-minute hop stand at 75 degrees. So set my Grainfather to 75. You can see that's just heating up there. Put my hops in the grain basket. And we sit there for 30 minutes and they'll do their thing. And then we'll go on to chilling. Right guys, this part here we're up to our wort chiller. So what a wort chiller does, it's got cold beer, hot beer, which is connected to the pump on the Grainfather. So that's where our arm screws onto, so we're going to whack that fella on there. The hot beer is going to go through the inside of the coil, and on the outside of the coil, I'm going to connect this up to cold water. It goes on there. Then we'll get our fermenter for our beer to go into the fermenter, and hot water that is circulating around, the cold water that is circulating around the hot wort comes out hot, which comes out in this vessel, this tube here. So theoretically, this wort is at 75 degrees. By the time it goes through the coil and comes out, it should be going to the fermenter somewhere around 25 degrees. So we're all hooked up. Turned our pump on. So our hot wort is coming out here. It is being circulated by the cold water. That's just pushing through a bit of sanitizer, and there's our cold beer, or our cool beer.
guys, welcome back. We're almost done. I'm getting a few beers in now, so if I start slurring, it's not my fault. Blame Seedy. So we've done our fresh wet kit. It's just sitting here, so you can just see how the fermentosaurus is working already. All that trub is starting to go down to the bottom, and the dip tube is sitting above the trub. So you can see in future, when I do my transfer, it's going to leave all that trub down at the bottom, which you don't want any keg. We've got some more videos coming. We're going to take you through the next steps of dry hopping, kegging versus bottling, and then I'm sure you all know how to drink a beer. Probably don't need to show you that. But there's actually a little trick. Don't ever wash your glasses in normal washing detergent. Use your sodium percarbonate or your pink stain and rinse them off with really, really hot water. If you use normal dishwashing detergent to wash your beer glasses, your beer's going to be really flat and really watery. It's a common misconception that I get in store all the time with a new kegging system. Their beers are flat. It's a film that gets left on the side of the glass. Little tip to finish up the day. November, you've probably noticed my beard's fallen off. So yeah, I am doing November. I'm all about looking after the boys and mental health. Please donate, look after each other, boys. Talk it out. Let's get a big brewing system together and all work together and nut it out, look after each other and have a bit of fun along the way. Any more info you need, just jump on newcastlebrewshop.com and follow us on Facebook and YouTube and we'll do what we can to help you out. Cheers, guys. Thanks for coming along today and look out for those new videos. Cheers and beers. See ya.